In this video, I want to give some insight on why I believe that CK2 is still the more replayable and engaging title when compared to its successor. But just to clarify, I love CK3. This video isn't meant to be an old good, new bad narrative, even if it might seem that way. I just want to address some of the shortcomings in the current title and explain why I think the predecessor handled those better. So let's get right into it. Crusader Kings 3 came out in September of 2020, the successor to the highly praised Crusader Kings 2. At the time, CK2 had been out for 8 entire years, racking up an impressive list of DLC and features. I recall that upon the release of Holy Fury, the game truly felt complete. You could pick a character from any region and have a genuinely fleshed out campaign with unique flavor events and goals to pursue, art and sound effects to match each region, culture, religion, and story. I spent hundreds of hours playing the game and had extensive experience with each of these regions, but it was time for the next big thing. CK3 looked amazing with its beautiful 3D portraits and imperative style map, and I was hugely excited to utilize the new religion system with its intricate doctrines and ultimately create the perfect realm. I remember playing and really enjoying CK3, as I still do. I knew there were some things that were still missing, quite a few to be fair, but I gave it the benefit of the doubt because, after all, the game had just been released. Nonetheless, I practically left CK2 in the dust, figuring that it wouldn't take long for the newest installment of the series to catch up. Though I'd played it on and off since release, recently was the only time that I'd been able to dedicate a significant amount of time to CK3. At first, I had a lot of fun. I played tours and tournaments upon release and loved, and I still love, the new travel system. There were some super interesting stories, like the time that my entire family died on a boat trip returning from France to Sardinia, or the time I found a Khazar consort to bring home with me on a pilgrimage to Kiev. That woman ended up tutoring my heir and ultimately being responsible in no small part for the creation of a hybrid Khazar-Norse culture. Viking horse archers, imagine that. But after putting a couple hundred hours into the game, in a relatively short period of time, I realized something was missing. The first thing that I noticed was that every game started to feel the same. Not only was it the same routine, but each region sorely lacked its own unique feeling. Of course, you have the simple differences of the names for realm priests, animal names, and knights, but I'm talking about actual flavor. I'm talking about how Northern Lords introduced new men-at-arms units for ancient adventures, new succession laws, and unique music and art, including hairstyles and clothing to the Scandinavian region. In my opinion, Northern Lords is genuinely the best release that Paradox has put out for CK3, holistically speaking. It's for that reason that I often spend most playthroughs as a Viking in some form or another. But let's get back on track here. That's just the problem. So many people love to play as Vikings so much, because realistically speaking, they're the only extensively fleshed out culture and region that the game currently has to offer. When you play as a Viking in CK3, you feel different to the rest of the map. Like your character and where they come from is unique. You just don't get that same feeling with anyone pretty much anywhere else. Even if you eventually create your own custom culture and faith, which almost every playthrough leads you to do, you often might fall short of the image that you wanted to create and project to yourself and the in-game world around you. I'll go more into depth later as to what it is that CK3 lacks in comparison to CK2 to make each region feel unique. But to stay on the subject of sameness of each campaign, once you become a king, which often happens in the span of a life or two, you are given a royal court. You feel like you're finally moving up in the world until you realize that there's nothing new outside of that. And the court events are often dissociated with the scale of issues that a real king should be dealing with. And they're repetitive. There's no new laws that you can unlock, no new treatment, no coronations from the Pope, nothing really. Worse still, by the time that you become an emperor, it's literally the same thing. You'll still get events about a stinky court or your cat ripping up someone's clothes for the 100th time. And Crown Authority 4 will be the extent to which you can exert any sort of authority over your realm. This sort of ties into another gripe that I have with the general design philosophy of CK3, which is that in its relentless quest to be perceived as a more user-friendly medieval Sims game, it's lost most of the sense of grandeur and splendor that CK2 inspired. I never really feel like an emperor. I never really feel like anything other than a guy standing there. And as Andy's Take put it in his video comparing the two titles, I have to admit, I actually prefer the 2D portrait system of CK2. It left a lot of room for imagination, and I felt like I was looking at a portrait of a regal ruler, not their nude and obese 80-year-old body as they cower in fear at the bathhouse while their courtier giggles at them. This all somewhat factors into my next point, which is the disparity in difficulty between the two. It also ends up becoming another thing that feels the same in every campaign. In CK3, you will rarely, if ever, find yourself genuinely hindered for long from achieving your goals. The difficulty is simply incredibly easy, and before you think that I'm just saying get good, it's actually a well-established fact. Developers and fans alike have agreed on this and have stated it plainly. And the new tragedy system implemented following tours and tournaments is Paradox's first attempt at taking a stab at this issue. The end result of the game being so easy is that it ultimately culminates in every campaign feeling samey. There's no surprises, no wrench thrown in your plans, and there certainly is never any AI competent enough to do anything about you steamrolling your way from Count to Emperor within a life or two. As such, the world can often feel more like a soft block of marble, just waiting for you to chisel it into any shape that you see fit, instead of an actual interactive setting with functioning states and capable characters. The only truly capable character is the player, and I really do mean that. You can have a chaste, temperate, and diligent heir, and still, alarmingly often, you'll find them cheating on their wife to sleep with their sister and plotting to murder their own brother. Suddenly, they inherit, and you begin playing as them, and they magically start to act either according to their values or in the best interest of the realm. I've had seemingly illogical situations like this crop up countless times while playing CK3, where a character would act completely against their traits and interests and cause issues for literally no reason. I'd ask for tribute from my brother, whom I'd just landed and who is my best friend, only to be rejected and given a free imprisonment reason on the guy. All of the AIs feel more like children that you have to shepherd into doing your will instead of grown nobles with vested interests in their well-being and image. Vassal factions have never once succeeded, nor has a popular uprising, and I can't remember the last time I wasn't able to gimmick my succession in some way, shape, or form. Some of my best memories of CK2 have been from overcoming adversity, and the most satisfying moments I've had in CK3 have all been somewhat similar, just less challenging. My favorite CK3 campaign to date was attempting to restore Zoroastrianism, just because it was the only one that I can recall in which I was met with resistance. I started my campaign as the Count of Gilan before quickly swearing fealty to the Caliph in exchange for jizya status. I remember at one point taking advantage of a huge independence faction to free myself after I'd managed to seize a few duchies, only to be attacked by a nearby independent duke. He seized the Duchy of Azerbaijan, and I remember sitting there staring at my screen dumbfounded. It was the first time that I'd had my plans unraveled by the AI in over 500 hours of playtime, and I was not about to let that slide. I remember plotting to kill him, and after a botched attempt, I succeeded. His realm split between his two sons, and I was ruthless in my efforts to reabsorb their lands and force them to renounce their claims. Regardless, I'd formed 2 kingdoms by the end of the next character's life, spelling the end of any challenge or dynamic stories from that campaign. Compare this to CK2, where in my first campaign upon returning to the game, I decided to try to play as a Welsh character. My goal was to have a dynasty of paragons, devout champions of the Catholic faith, and ultimately rulers of the Celtic British Isles. Wales is a relatively easy region to play in, most people think. Once you form the kingdom, at least in CK3, most of your neighbors are never going to be powerful enough to stop you. Think again. It took me a significant amount of time to become the King of Wales, several decades. I gave myself a slightly overpowered, brilliant strategist to help ease myself back into the game, so I never lost any battles in which I had equal or superior numbers. The difficulty was in getting the claims. It took me 3 decades to acquire all the claims that I needed to finally conquer enough of Wales to form the kingdom. By the time that I'd finally gotten control, I zoomed out to find the British Isles in quite a state. The Vikings had run rampant and were everywhere. The moral authority of Catholicism had been drastically weakened, and heresies were breaking out like a plague. The Franks were too busy bickering amongst themselves to stop an Umayyad incursion into southern France, and I was the last bastion of Catholicism in the British Isles. It was a total mess. I tried to attack the Norse Duke of Mercia in a holy war for his duchy, only to be beaten back when several Germanic rulers rushed to his defense. I had to pay up big time, and spent years recuperating the losses. An uprising of heretical zealots right afterwards acted like salt in the wound, causing me to lose the capital duchy, all whilst the Pope wouldn't quit demanding the holy preface in exchange for my coronation. Not only that, but I'd managed to have a whopping 2 children in my loveless marriage with my lunatic wife. I couldn't kill her, and the Pope refused to grant me a divorce, but I was a good Catholic, so I saw it through. I eventually died from dysentery at 68. The point is, a lot of things didn't go the way I'd wanted or expected. It was like that for most of the campaign, until I finally formed the Empire. People kept dying from disease, they'd die in childbirth, and sometimes they'd get assassinated, or in one ruler's case, killed by death himself in a game of chess. It made my run very challenging, and by the time I finally managed to form the Empire of Prydain, sorry if I'm butchering that, I felt like I'd truly accomplished something. The Pope treated me with respect, and hundreds of years of technological advancement, great work construction, and gradual implementation of an absolute imperial autocracy gave rise to a truly regal empire, one where I derived all my power from the legal systems my innumerable ancestors had strove to put in place for over 2 centuries straight, instead of from being a genetic superhuman. Why is it in CK3 that when your high stewardship character dies, your income suddenly gets cut by 3/4? Did all the infrastructure he'd put in place suddenly collapse upon his death? I only ever had 2 genius characters in my CK2 campaign, those being my first 2, and most of the characters I played straight up suck. Why are the good congenital traits so absurdly common in CK3? They feel more like a given than a lucky draw. I see people on the forum saying that you should just stop min-maxing and stop trying to create genetic superhumans. I don't try and do that. I never have some complex eugenics program in either game. I just try to acquire good traits. After all, why else are they in the game? In CK2, you can spend a lot of time trying to get those good traits and you still won't get them. But just because your character isn't a beautiful, fecund, Herculean genius doesn't mean that they can't rule a state or be a competent ruler. Part of this difficulty disparity can also be seen in the behavior of the AI in each game. I know I touched a little bit on this earlier in this section, but I just want to expand on it here. AI realms in CK3 are like paper mache, ridiculously easy to tear apart and rarely ever pose a threat. It's not hard to go on an entire campaign without once being declared war on, and it's not hard to tear apart a realm by assassinating a ruler or 2. Your vassals are incompetent and will never truly threaten you, especially once you achieve Crown Authority 4. Comparatively, vassals in CK2 can become seriously problematic, and all AI are generally very opportunistic. They'll dogpile around the moment they smell weakness, often leading to a collapse in the power structure. culture. Foreign realms are actually powerhouses, especially the French, Byzantines, and the Abbasids. They'll often hold themselves together for centuries, even when you try and meddle. But thankfully, it is possible to meddle enough to finally cause them to come crashing down. It just isn't such an easy task. I can't count the number of times I've killed a foreign emperor in CK3 by just bribing their entire court. I don't really need an intrigue character to do it. In CK2, if you hope to take down a big realm by mass assassination, you're going to need a top-tier schemer. And even then, sometimes the realm is just too stable, and it's a well-liked ruler you're targeting. Tough luck. That's the way it should be. I shouldn't just be able to force a realm to come crashing down because I've got a big treasury, or because I feel like it, and the AI should actually show competence at least once in a while. My next gripe with CK3 is the list of missing features. Now, I'll be the first to admit, it has a lot of great features that CK2 doesn't. The cultural hybridization, custom religious system, vassal contracts, hook system, and lifestyle trees are all really great. I might be missing one or two things, but the issue is that the list pretty much ends there. As a successor to CK2, you'd expect almost all key features from the predecessor to be in CK3 right now. I've read that the developers plan on implementing these things eventually, and even better, but this video essay is here to talk about how in June of 2023 they're still not in the game. I also want to clarify that I actually liked the old Paradox DLC policy, and I know that'll catch me some flack, but at the end of the day, as long as the DLC wasn't half-assed and was chock full of features and positive improvements, I've always been willing to fork over some cash to the studio that I know has and will continue to give me hundreds of hours of enjoyment. Regardless, that's not the point of the video or this section. The missing features that I can think of off the top of my head are as follows. Several government types, including merchant republics, monastic feudal, nomadic and imperial, societies, great works, bloodlines, a comprehensive disease and epidemic system including the Black Death, a fleshed out Catholic experience including better crusades, saints, beatification, the College of Cardinals, and anti-popes. Several types of map modes, more laws, fleet levies, a prosperity system, and a complete lack of military depth akin to CK2. At the end of the day, you can still get on just fine playing CK3 without these things, and many people do, but the fact that the game has been out for 3 years and we still don't have so many of these features from the previous one really shows. It feels bare bones at times, and returning to CK2 made me realize how especially crucial the prosperity and disease system was to making the world feel alive and deadly. Watching disease ravage the court and seeing the Black Death paint its way across the map and narrowly miss me was truly memorable. I can't count the number of times someone died of a genuinely deadly illness, instead of the lip service system that CK3 has, in which you don't even require a court physician because you know that unless someone is already in horrible shape or they're old, diseases have a non-existent chance of killing them, especially if you ever have any health bonuses, which of course you will. Part of the reason that we're missing so many features is because of the development cycle of CK3. If you compare the two, you'll see that the speed at which they release major DLC has now been more than half. I'm not even going to say that this wouldn't be a problem because it is a problem. One major DLC per year would be fine, but we're looking at 2 in the span of 3 years, one of which was negatively received and did serious harm to the game's reputation. Tours and Tournaments is great, don't get me wrong, but it being one of 2 and the only major DLC in 3 years that is good since release is not great. The very last thing I want to touch on in this video is a comparison of some ambiance elements. I'm talking about this in relation to the UI, the soundtracks, and the character progression. One thing that you'll notice about, and one thing that CK2 is heavily criticized for in comparison to its younger sibling, is its archaic UI. It's true, it's not the prettiest thing in the world at times, but there are certain elements about the CK2 UI which, in my opinion, make it much more fun to interact with and much more immersive. One of these things is the uniqueness of the UI in each region. They've implemented this a little bit in CK3 so far, but not to the same extent. I also appreciate the art style and the excellent sound design that you can experience when you click on different tabs and interact with different systems. Certain events cause unique sounds, such as executions, assassinations, and holy wars. Clicking on your artifacts makes sounds, and overall the UI feels much more endearing as a result. The soundtrack of CK2 is also legendary and really special. CK3 has some great tracks, and I particularly like some of the war declaration songs, and a few of the Indian tracks are really well done. But all in all, CK2's is a lot better, and I found myself routinely bumping to it, whilst I often mute CK3's and play my own music because it's just not that special. But to get into the meat and bones of this section and the last thing I'm going to talk about today, let's go over the character progression in each game. CK3 has a pretty linear character progression system. You turn 16 and you have 3 divining traits. These traits will literally never change, so if you're shy, you'll always be shy. You can never become ambitious or content. You're just either or, permanently at age 16. Other than that, the only change to your personality that you'll ever experience is a trait for coping with stress or two. You'll rack up a very, very long list of achievements, which will be listed on your character by the time that you die around 70 or 90, which you almost always live to, and that's that. You never lose stats, you rarely become infirm or sickly, and you don't change your personality. You certainly don't ever become a different person as the events of your life unfold. That's my final gripe with CK3. In my aforementioned Welsh campaign, the eagle-eyed amongst you may have spotted one King Bongar the Cruel. Bongar wasn't always cruel. He grew up a relatively relaxed and normal guy, but when he took the throne, he was cynical and arbitrary. Now, these two traits, in and of themselves, aren't always cause for someone to be remembered as a tyrant. However, what happened was that he made enemies with the church in his realm, who disapproved of his cynicism. His vassals didn't like his arbitrary nature, and as a result, he felt scorned by the world. I decided I'd go full demon worshipper with this guy and joined Lucifer's own. One vassal rebellion later, Bongar earned his moniker through his callous and ruthless treatment of the rebel. He became cruel in response to the friction he was met with during his reign. It wasn't always in his nature to abduct people and worship demons, but he felt so pushed to that by the complete lack of empathy he'd received from the church and the nobility for what was in his eyes just being a little bit of a cynic and having fun. And it's dynamic stories like that which unfold and create a character molded by their surroundings that led me to enjoy the more fluid trait system of CK2. That's the end of the video. If you made it that far, thanks for watching. To reiterate, I do really enjoy and love CK3, and I'm positive that it'll eventually surpass its predecessor in these areas. I just wanted to make this video as a sort of love letter to one of my favorite games of all time, which still retains its magic today, and as a nudge for Paradox to start pumping out more good content that we missed from the older installment. And for all you CK fans who've never played CK2 before, in hopes I might inspire you to give it a shot. After all, it's free. What are you waiting for? What do you think? Is CK3 better than CK2, and why or why not?